Hello, very good afternoon to you. I'm Jo Kent with the news in the south. As you may have seen, it could take several days to refloat a cargo ship which ran aground off Southampton last night. Lifeboats and a helicopter were deployed to rescue the crew of the Hoegh Osaka, which hit the Bramble Banks sandbar. The ship was transporting cars from Southampton to Germany, but is now listing at 45 degrees in the Solent. The owner of the shipping company is holding a press conference in Southampton shortly. Rebecca Williams is there for us. Rebecca, it's been a dramatic 24 hours.
Absolutely.
OK, I'm sorry about that. We seem to have a technical problem with Rebecca there. I can tell you lifeboat crews have been talking about the dramatic rescue.
We made our way round to the bow of the vessel where we worked with Calshot Lifeboat, who were recovering a crew member who was at the sort of front of the boat in the area where the mooring lines are stored. There was then a second crew member who was struggling to make their way to the high side of the vessel. They actually then jumped into the water. They recovered them and put both those casualties onto Yarmouth's all-weather lifeboat that was also on scene.
The Salvage Team has been making an initial assessment of the Hoegh Osaka. Coast Guard say there's no reported pollution and no impact on other vessels in the Solent, as the ship isn't within a shipping channel. But plenty of sightseers have been gathering on the shoreline to see the stricken vessel.
It's unbelievable. I mean, 51,000 tonnes, I think they said it was. I mean, trying to bring that thing upright is going to be quite a task.
It's local. I like photography. You know, it's something unusual, isn't it?
Show the kids. How often do you see that? It's quite bizarre, isn't it?
And we'll bring you the latest on that press conference in our late bulletin at 10:20 tonight.
Maritime experts are warning that refloating a large cargo ship that's run aground off the Isle of Wight could be a lengthy process. The Hoegh Osaka had just left Southampton bound for Germany when it hit a sandbar known as Bramble Bank in the Solent. All 25 crew were rescued. Robert Hall reports.
She should have been well on her way to Bremerhaven, but this evening the Hoegh Osaka lies beached and immovable alongside one of the UK's busiest shipping channels. Move closer and there's clear evidence of the emergency which unfolded late last night. 25 crew members scrambled down the huge hull to waiting rescue vessels.
Our inshore lifeboat actually did pull somebody from the water that was on the low side, was identified and then made a jump for it, and then with the tide conditions started to pull him under the hull, so the ILB sort of got in and dragged him clear.
These massive car carriers, nearly 200 metres long, are regular visitors to Southampton. Pilots and escort vessels help them navigate a challenging route into and out of the port. North of the Isle of Wight, the ships follow an S-shaped channel around the Sandbanks. Evidence so far indicates that the Hoegh Osaka veered off course after rounding the Bramble Bank.
When you get up close to this huge vessel, you get a real sense of the problems facing any salvage operation. She's listing at about 45 degrees, lying on her side on top of the Bramble sandbank. Inside her, cargo may well have shifted, and that's going to mean refloating her is even more difficult.
The question comes out, do we need to lighten the ship? Do we need to shift ballast around? And perhaps most importantly, do they have to take the oil off?
Add to that the need for tide and weather conditions to be just right. The next high tide is in a few hours, but a successful salvage may take rather longer. Robert Hall, BBC News, the Solent.
An attempt to refloat a ship which grounded in the Solent will now not take place tomorrow. The salvage team working on the Hoegh Osaka now say the car carrier has taken on more water than first thought. The discovery means they won't have enough time to refloat the ship before weather conditions are expected to worsen. Instead, they hope to secure the vessel to the sandbank where it was deliberately grounded after developing a dangerous list after leaving Southampton.
If we decide to refloat her, then she will be floating like 50 degrees, and it takes a lot of steps and difficult calculations to really bring it back into an upright position. But we rather do that while being afloat, because sitting on a sandbank, she is not actually, she can be damaged further.
The saga of the giant car transporter Hoegh Osaka took a dramatic twist today when Mother Nature gave salvage experts a helping hand and the ship refloated on the high tide. A fleet of tugs took hold of the huge ship and tonight it's being towed to Spitbank near Portsmouth. The Hoegh Osaka had been stranded on the Bramble Sandbank for 4 days after being deliberately run aground. Our reporter Steve Humphrey was watching as the ship started to shift.
It was totally unplanned, but when the Hoegh Osaka started to move, the salvage team didn't hesitate. Extra tugs were called in and she was soon under control. After 4 days sat on the Bramble Bank, the ship's progress through the water could be seen with the naked eye. The moment was witnessed by hundreds of people here at Calshot and elsewhere on the coast, who'd arrived to take a look at the ship that has been making headlines around the world.
One has to be surprised that anything of this sort happens so swiftly. We thought it was probably stuck there for days.
We were quite surprised really because we weren't expecting it to move at all today. So yeah, it's quite amazing.
And this was the view that Mike Seeley had from one of the Isle of Wight ferries.
Well, that is amazing. She was over there with the black and yellow buoy, just there, and she's now moved.
The ship was deliberately grounded on the Bramble Bank on Saturday evening after developing a serious list as she left Southampton docks. All 25 people on board were rescued by helicopter and lifeboats.
The Hoegh Osaka started to move at round about 1:45 this afternoon. The Marine and Coast Guard Agency say that the 51,000-ton ship self-floated on the high tide.
The man with overall responsibility for the operation says the salvage team and the tugboat crews had to act swiftly when the Hoegh Osaka started to move.
Obviously, our concern at that stage was that she had drifted into the main shipping channel. As soon as that happened, the salver requested additional tugs.
Tonight, the car transporter is on the move, but she's travelling very slowly at around 1 mile an hour. Her destination is towards Portsmouth, where the priority for the salvage team is to put her back on an even keel.
Steve's here with me now. You just said she's moving pretty slowly, so what's the latest?
Well, she's on her way to the Spitbank just off Portsmouth. In fact, we can see a live picture of the progress of the Hoegh Osaka. These shots live, taken just off the coast at Lyon, the Solent tonight. So you can see she's moving very slowly. She is very, very tilted to one side still. They'll only correct that when she gets to the Spit Bank. Once she's there, they will want to make her safe and stable, and then of course once that happens they will then take her into a port and offload the cargo. So still a lot of work to do.
Steve, thanks very much.
Well, the high winds have made it unsafe for salvage experts to begin pumping water from the stricken car transporter Hoegh Osaka in the Solent today. The vessel has been anchored off Lyon Solent since Wednesday, but dragged its anchor overnight, moving around 100 metres. The Maritime and Coast Guard Agency says there's still no evidence of pollution from the Hoegh Osaka, and its list has got no worse. Salvage experts have finally been able to board the stricken car transporter, the Hoegh Osaka, in the Solent after being prevented by bad weather yesterday. It's emerged one of the 3 tugs with the anchored vessel was damaged after colliding with it yesterday afternoon. No one was injured and there was no pollution nor damage to the Hoegh Osaka, but the tug has been replaced.
This evening's predicted stormy weather could make things difficult for the salvors of the stricken cargo ship Hoegh Osaka. Additional tugs are being used to secure the ship, but they've been told that if conditions become unmanageable, they should let her roll free and reground herself. It's ahead of heavy wind and rain, which is predicted across parts of the south this evening and through the night. The Hoegh Osaka is currently anchored near Lyon the Solent. Let's join Laura Trant, who's there for us now. Laura.
Well, Sally, it's very windy tonight and the waters are very choppy behind me, and that's set to get a lot more dramatic as the severe weather kicks in overnight. Now, you'll remember last weekend one of the tugs involved in supporting the stricken car transporter, the Hoegh Osaka, ended up colliding with the ship, and that's because of the strong winds that there were at the time. Well, tonight the weather is set to be a lot stronger than that. We're expecting gale force winds of 8 and 9 and gusts of up to 75 miles per hour. Because of that, the Salvage Svitzer have come up with a contingency plan. They've said to the tugs that if they feel that the weather is too challenging and if they feel that they're losing control of the ship, they must release her, in which case she would then move off and hit a bank of sand and mud. Earlier today, the oceanographer Dr. Simon Boxall explained to us why that's the safest option.
Trying to hold a 50,000-ton ship, which is built like a block of flats with a very high windage, is a very dangerous thing to do. The tugs aren't designed to do that, and it puts the tug crews and the tugs themselves in serious danger. By letting the ship go, the worst that happens is that it blows on to the Sandbanks to the south of Lyon Solent. So it's in no worse a position than it was a week ago.
Well, the Hoegh Osaka is currently at an angle of 50 degrees. Decks 2 and 4 are completely submerged in water. Now, a helicopter is going to get involved once the weather improves and it's safe to have people and specialist equipment on board.
I can see it's very, very windy there for you, Laura. It's expected to get much worse through the night.
Yes.
Councils are getting prepared, obviously.
Yes, they are getting prepared. In the Isle of Wight, sandbags have been issued to people in Yarmouth, Newport and Cowes who are concerned about localised flooding. The Environment Agency have issued yellow warnings and flood alerts to Hampshire, to the Isle of Wight and to Sussex. They've also issued localised flooding alerts along the upper and lower River Loddon, so that could potentially affect places like Basingstoke and Winnersh. And they've also issued flood alerts to the River Wey. That could impact Guildford and Alton. The weather is expected to get treacherous overnight. It's bad enough now, but it's going to get particularly nasty. But we are assured it should be somewhat calmer by the morning. From Lyon Solent, back to you, Sally.
Laura, thank you very much.
Salvage experts working on the stricken car transporter, the Hoegh Osaka, say they hope to move it back to port over the next 2 days. The ship won't be towed until she's tilting at around 5 degrees. She's currently at 25 degrees. Salvers say that good weather over the next 2 days is vital for the operation to take place. Otherwise, the ship may not be moved to Southampton port until Sunday.
We're still looking to bring the vessel upright as much as we can, and really for the tow up to the port, we would really like to get that to below 5 degrees. Anything above 5 degrees would start making it quite difficult in the port to start putting the ramps out when others get to the stage of discharging the cargo.
Here, salvage workers are hoping to refloat a giant cargo ship that's been stranded on a sandbank on the Solent for 2 weeks. The operation is due to get underway later this afternoon. And we can speak to our correspondent Duncan Kennedy, who's on a boat near the vessel. Duncan.
Well, Simon, what a journey it's been for the Hoegh Osaka here over that 19-day period, actually, ever since it's been out here on the Solent, been bobbing around. It all started, of course, on January the 3rd when it ran aground, deliberately run aground on that sandbank by the captain and the pilot who feared the ship was listing over. It then refloated itself 4 days later and was towed to this spot we're at now, where they've had all kinds of problems. They've been battling the weather. They've also had this 50-degree list in the ship, which has now been pretty much rectified. It's only listing at about 5 degrees now, which is what they were looking for. They've also had 2,000 or 3,000 tonnes of water on board that they've been pumping out over the past 2 weeks or so. The clean stuff has gone into the Solent. The dirty stuff is being used for ballast on the ship itself. So what we're expecting at about 3:30 this afternoon is that they'll up anchor and start towing it back into port behind me here. We don't think they're going to use the ship's engines. We think it is going to be towed. There is some power on board for some of the systems on board, but not enough to come under its own steam up Southampton water. And when it gets there, at that point it will berth. And finally, these hundreds and hundreds of cars and tractors on board will be offloaded. Tractors and cars, I have to say, Simon, that are most likely destined for the scrapyard.
Duncan Kennedy, thank you.
The Hoegh Osaka is safely back in port tonight. The car transporter is berthed in Southampton, showing few signs of her troubled start to the new year. She was towed back in, past the sandbank that had been her temporary home, after salvage teams had brought her back onto an almost even keel. As her dramatic journey came to an end, she was still drawing crowds. Let's join Steve Humphrey. He's live at Southampton docks for us tonight. Steve.
Sally, here she is at last. The Hoegh Osaka began her journey back here a little bit earlier than advertised this afternoon. She has had a lot of water pumped out of her, but as you might be able to see behind me, she still has a very slight list to the right-hand side. It has been a very long salvage operation, but in the end, a successful one. Now, my colleague Duncan Kennedy was out in the Solent as the car transporter began her journey back to port.
Well, it's taken 19 days to get to this point where finally the Hoegh Osaka is being cleared from the Solent. Here she is coming into Southampton water at about 3 to 4 knots. And as you can see, it's surrounded by tugs, a couple on either side of her to make sure she doesn't drift that way. One here at the back of her to make sure her stern doesn't drift aside. But the main tug that's done all the work today is out in front, pulling the ship back into port, and now it is heading back to the place where it started on the January the 3rd. And it's at that point all the vehicles and all the mechanical diggers on board will be taken off at the end of this extraordinary maritime drama.
Well, as Duncan mentioned there, the Hoegh Osaka first ran into trouble on that Saturday evening, January the 3rd. She was then anchored for 16 days between Lyon, the Solent and the Isle of Wight as the salvage team made her safe for the relatively short journey back here to Southampton. In the early afternoon sunshine, the Hoegh Osaka left her anchorage between Lyon, the Solent and the Isle of Wight. Over the past few weeks, she has attracted a steady stream of sightseers.
It was very busy, been down here, as I say, the weekend, and it has, and I think people are coming from everywhere, really, I would have thought.
I'm just wondering whether I can get a Mini or a Bentley when they unload it.
And the huge ship has been good for trade, as the sightseers stop for drinks and meals in the local cafes.
Oh, it's been brilliant. It's literally doubled our trade. Quiet time of year, and it's been fantastic. We've been packed every day since this has happened. I would love it to stay.
Back on January the 3rd, when the car carrier ended up on the Bramble Bank, it was listing at 52 degrees. After the refloat, salvage teams reduced that to 48 degrees as the weather improved. That dropped to 25 degrees once the 3,000 tonnes of water was pumped out or used as ballast. The vessel could only be brought into port in a near normal state. The next step now is to unload all the cars on board and assess the damage. Well, in an exclusive BBC interview this afternoon, the family that owns the Hoegh Osaka said that they are very relieved that she is now safely back in port.
Something that could have ended up in more dramatic circumstances of with no really serious injury to any people or to the environment or for the surrounding area. And so seeing the ship being moved very safely back into port is exactly the outcome that we hoped for once the incident had taken place.
Well, we suspect that some fairly sizable insurance claims will have to be sorted out in the wake of the Hoegh Osaka episode. Also, a thorough investigation is underway to try to find out what went wrong in the first place. And make no mistake, the name Hoegh Osaka is now part of the South's maritime history. Sally.
Steve, thank you very much.